All right, so we're live, everyone. So we're going to be arguing about theism. So I'm obviously an atheist, and he is a theist. So yeah. So do you wanna do you wanna just start with your case, your just basic case for theism?
Okay. Uh, Basically, my argument, my case has two parts. First, the universe has a cause. Second, that cause is an intelligent creator. Uh, Firstly, as for universe having a cause, uh, universe began to exist. We can prove this point very simply. If the universe is past eternal, that means an infinite number of days have preceded today. That cannot happen,
Wait,
which is why universe
sorry,
cannot be past eternal. The proof,
sorry. Just before you sort of
yeah,
present your whole case, can I just how are you defining the universe? So do you just mean space time?
yeah, and things
Okay, the
within
universe
them,
is space.
within space of time.
Okay, so you think that the universe has to
Yeah,
have had a cause, and that cause has to be God. Okay. All right, sorry. Continue laying out your case for why the universe has to have had a cause.
okay. The proof for beginning of the universe is very simple. If if the universe is past eternal, that means an infinite number of days have passed. An infinite number of days cannot pass, so universe cannot be past eternal. Let me prove the point that an infinite number of days cannot pass. If we were to count each day that passes, 1 day can pass, 2 days can pass, 10 days can pass, 1,000 days can pass, but an infinite number of days cannot pass because more days can always pass. So universe cannot be past eternal, hence it has to have a beginning. Uh, Now, why does this prove universe has a cause? Because whatever begins to exist has a cause. This statement is proven by the fact that its opposite is that something can come from nothing, which is irrational and insane to be frank. It is like saying zero can equal one. That's impossible. Uh, Now, which is why universe has a cause. This argument till now I can only prove universe has a cause. The fine tuning argument show that cause of the universe is an intelligent creator.
Wait, sorry, but okay,
Uh,
before we move
Let
on to the
me
fine tuning,
explain.
well, you said you wanted to have it be an open discussion. So before you move on to the fine tuning argument, let's address this argument. So I deny both of your claims. I don't understand what's impossible about an infinite succession of past events. A couple of points on this. One, so you just show that if you start with a finite number of days, then you can't reach an infinite number by successive addition. But that's not in dispute at all. Nobody claims you can. The claim is just that it was always infinite. So you didn't start out from a finite point and then count up to infinity. There just was no beginning. So your point would not be relevant. And you believe in an infinite future. So what's the difference between an infinite future and an infinite past? I also don't see what the reason we think things need a cause to begin to exist. You just asserted that it was irrational to believe the opposite. I don't. That wasn't an argument.
Okay. As to your point about beginning of the universe and traversing an infinite, yeah, you said that because it is always infinite, we can reach. It is just infinite, and that the point about formation of electron infinite does not apply here. Yeah,
Right.
this is what you said.
Yes.
Okay, this is what you said. Now, in an eternal past, we are arriving from an infinite number of days to today. Yeah, that is like saying arriving from negative infinity to zero, to a
Well,
particular
right.
point, zero
But
or any other point. Yeah,
yeah. Well, you're
that is
assuming that we're well, no, you're assuming that we're starting out at a finite point. The point is that we don't start out at day one and then count until infinity. The days have been going infinitely far back into the past. And so the claim is not that you can get it through successive addition. The claim is that it's not through
and
successive addition.
yeah, that's why I mentioned negative infinity. I'm not. That is not a starting point. Negative infinity is not a starting point. If it was a particular number like minus 10,000 minus 1 million, then it would be a starting point. A negative infinity is not a starting point. and an eternal universe. This is precisely what is happening. We are arriving from negative infinity to zero. Now, what is the change here? We can check that a final minus initial 0 minus negative infinity is positive infinity. So an in actual infinite is being traversed either way. Up actual positive infinite is being traversed either way. That's impossible.
Well, I don't
Uh,
understand why that's
you
impossible,
can,
and it's especially not impossible if we adopt the B theory of time, which says that there's no objective present, but each moment of time is equally real. So there's no moment of time that's the present, and then the next moment of time that's the present. Rather, time exists as a four-dimensional sort of as like a fourth dimension, where each moment in time is equally real, and there's no objective present. And on the B theory of time, there's nothing impossible about having an infinite number of moments, just like there's nothing impossible about there being an infinite something being infinite in a spatial dimension. And the B theory of time is the consensus view from both philosophers and scientists who have studied the inner workings of time. And so, if the B, and even Craig has admitted that if the B theory of time is true, the Kalam cosmological argument doesn't work.
uh, 2 points. Firstly, this argument is assuming the A theory of time. It's not on the B theory of time. First point. Second point.
Well, but I think that the B
Where
theory of
you
time
getting
is
that
true,
consensus claim?
probably. So,
And third point, I didn't ask that. I asked where did you get that consensus claim from? Because you did say that the consensus, or this, or at least vast majority of scientists and philosophers agree with this. Where did you get that from? I asked that. And the
yeah, it
third
came from
point
it.
is
it
even in
wait,
a
you
B
asked
theory
me.
of time.
Wait, sorry, can I answer your question before you move on? Okay, so in terms of where I got that from, I got it from S. Feld's 2007 paper. I'll send you the link. Or sorry, S. Feld.
Can you repeat?
Yeah, here. I just put it in the chat. Or wait, sorry, that was saying that special relativity says that. Sorry, that was the wrong thing, though. That also does support the B theory of time, but the claim that if the consensus comes from Zimmerman.
Before that, just one moment. We are on the second point, right? You gave me the reference about B theory of time being the consensus. Just give me a
Right.
moment to recall
The
the third point.
Yeah, the second link that I just sent supports that the B theory of time is a consensus view.
Well, I have to research that topic more to speak about B theory of the time being the consensus. But even if B theory of time is true, the number of days that precede today still cannot be infinite. That cannot
Well,
happen either way. This won't
no.
prove the
So
beginning of the universe in a B theory of time. The number of days that we see today will not be infinite either way.
well, you're just pointing out the possibility of traversing an infinite number of days, but the B theory of time just says that moments in time, that there's no objective present. So we didn't traverse an infinite number of days. There were just an infinite number of temporal locations. The same way, presumably, you would think that something could be infinitely large spatially, right?
No, even if there are, let's say the B theory of time is true, let's assume that, yeah,
Wait.
still the
The
number
question I
of
asked you was
moments that
the number of moments of time is 0 because there's no objective present. So it's not like there is a moment of time. It's that just there are distinct. Well, I guess there is a moment in the broad sense, but there was no. It's not like there was one moment and then it moved on to the next moment. Each moment exists simultaneously and is equally real.
yes, each moment exists simultaneously, but today is causally related to yesterday. The events that happened yesterday in our experience are related to today, and the events that happen today are related to what happens tomorrow. That
Okay,
Even in a
true.
B theory of time, the number of days that we see today cannot be infinite. That just can't happen, even in a B theory of
Why?
time,
Why?
because it requires an actual infinite to be traversed. Let's say that is
No,
like
no,
saying
there, no,
we can
no, no.
arrive from negative infinity.
It doesn't. There's no traversing. Nothing's being traversed because
There
there's
is
no
a
objective
traversing
present.
in the sense of even if there is no objective presence on a B theory of time, the events that happen today are linked to events that happened yesterday. Even if all is happening at the same time, the events that are happening today are still linked to what is happening yesterday, and what happens tomorrow is linked to happen today. That link
Right.
between the days
I
or the moments of time.
Yeah, I don't see that. But how does that prove that the B theory of time is false?
I wasn't trying to prove B theory of time is false. I was
Or sorry,
responding to
sorry.
your point that
Well,
the number
yeah, okay. So do you do you think that there are an infinite number of numbers?
what do you mean?
Like, I think the question is self-explanatory. Do you think there are an infinite number of numbers?
No, in what sense? In terms of potential infinite, actual infinite? What do you
That there are
mean?
an
You have to
actual
clarify that.
Are there an actually infinite number of numbers?
Uh, in terms of how they apply to reality, or in a vague mathematical sense?
In a mathematical sense.
I don't really know the answer to that, but in terms of
Right.
how
I
they
mean,
apply to
the answer to
reality,
this the answer to this is obviously yes. There are an infinite number of numbers, and so and each number
why?
comes after each number that exists comes after the number before it. Right. For any number, you can just keep adding one. So there's an infinite number
How
of
would we
numbers.
say
But
there are
the
actually
fact that
infinite
each
number of
number
numbers?
the fact that there are an infinite number of numbers, each of which depends on some number before it and is one more than that number, there's nothing impossible about that. We know that it exists, given that it exists in the realm of numbers. And so on the B theory of time, reality is just like that.
No, on a B theory of time, firstly, to clarify one point, I'm not here to argue against B theory of time. My argument assumes the theory of time, but I'm not arguing against the B theory of time for now. Secondly, there are distinction between potential infinites and actual infinites. Thirdly, whether infinite can exist in mathematical
Wait, sorry.
axioms, that does nothing to show that it applies in reality or not.
Yeah, no, I know. None of that is in dispute. The claim is just that. So you said that we can't traverse an actual number of infinites, right? So or sorry, you said that even on the B theory of time, where there's no objective present, then you can't traverse an infinite number of moments because each moment would have to come after some other moment. And you can't, if you just go one moment at a time, you'll never get to the present if there are an infinite number of past moments. But the whole point is that on the B theory of time, there's no objective present. So time doesn't pass. Each moment of time is equally real on the B theory of time. As a result of that, there's no logical difficulty with the universe being infinitely old any more than there is a logical difficulty with the universe with there being an infinite number of numbers, each of which comes after some number that came before it. It would make no sense to say that you can't get to the number 6 because there are an infinite number of negative numbers that come before it, right? And so the same thing would just be true on the B theory of time. There are, an infinite number of past and future moments. And each point has some temporal location, but there's nothing impossible about that.
No, you are ignoring the point about the events that happen today are affected by the event that happened yesterday. Even if this is all happening at the same time in a B theory of time, the number of days for that reason that we see today cannot be infinite
Well, no,
because
that's not
because of that relation.
I'm not ignoring. I'm
because
not
that
ignoring.
requires an actual infinite to be clearness.
I'm not ignoring that at all. The point is that, so much like with any number will have to come after some other number. But that doesn't mean that there can't be an infinite number of numbers. So there is no argument given as to why there can't be an infinite number of temporal points, assuming there's no objective becoming.
Again, you are conflating between numbers in a mathematical sense, numbers in the way that they apply to reality.
No. I'm using numbers
again,
as an analogy. No, I'm not doing that. I'm using numbers as an analogy to show that the fact that something comes after something else and that something depends on something before it, and there are an infinite number of things that it depends on, does not mean that there can't be an infinite number, is it?
But that analogy doesn't work because it is in a mathematical sense. It is not in the way that it applies to reality. You're ignoring that point.
Well, no. So I'm not saying that because it exists in a mathematical sense, it can exist in reality. Here, let's take a different example. Do you think that it would be possible for God to make an infinitely big universe? Just infinitely spatially large.
Yeah, God can do anything.
Okay, God. So you think
But
that so you think that an infinitely spatially large universe is logically possible?
Again, there's a difference between something being logically contradictory and something being mathematically impossible.
Wait, so do you think that it's that an infinitely
I
spatially
am
large
answering it.
universe
There's a difference between.
is an infinitely
Can you
spatially
repeat the
large
question?
universe? What?
Yeah, God can create that, but there's a difference between something logically possible, logically contradictory or not, and being metaphysically impossible. And actual infinite is metaphysically impossible because it leads to impossibilities. Plus, the point about infinite cannot be traversed in an eternal past, even on the B theory time. Actually, it's really changing the topic, but since we are on here, let's finish this point. Even in a B theory of time, today is preceded by an infinite number of days. Like, even if time is an illusion, right? Even if time is an illusion, the events that are happening today are affected by the events that happened yesterday, and then by the day before that, and then by the day before that. This is like saying we can arrive from negative infinity to zero. Now, zero is our final point. Negative infinity is
Yeah,
our
no,
initial
you're
point. Zero minus negative infinity is positive infinity. That is the change. A positive infinity is being traversed either way. And that's like saying
right.
we can get to infinite on a number line. That cannot
Look,
happen.
you're repeating yourself. Right. So the question that I asked was, do you think that a infinitely large universe is metaphysically possible? Yes or no?
God can create that, but even if we just stick to
I,
basic logic, no.
I well, no. So the question is it metaphysically possible? Yes or no?
This is
Hello?
I am answering this question. There is a difference between what is we can get at through logic and
That's
philosophy and what God can do. Because God can do conceivably anything.
look.
Why does God need to be
No.
bound by logic and philosophy?
No, I know, right? So you keep saying that, but the question that I'm asking you is: do you think that an infinitely large universe is metaphysically possible? I'm not asking anything about God. I'm just asking if an infinitely
I have
large
to answer
universe
your
is
question.
metaphysically possible. Yes or no?
Through
Hello?
I need to answer your question. I don't need to answer it in the way you want me to answer it. There's a difference
You're
between that.
answering.
Those two
You're
things.
answering a different question. The question that I'm asking you is: do you think that an infinitely large universe is metaphysically possible? You're telling me things about God. That's not what I'm asking. The question I'm asking you has nothing to do with God. It's just about whether an infinitely large universe is metaphysically possible.
No, you are assuming that
I'm assuming
what
nothing. I'm just
God can
asking a
do.
question. I'm not asking anything about what God can do. I'm just asking if an infinitely large universe is metaphysically possible.
Going by all our logic and philosophy, yeah, that includes metaphysics. No,
Okay,
it's not.
okay.
But
It's not
does
metaphysically possible.
this change the fact that whether God can do this or not? No, God can do anything.
Okay, great. So it's not metaphysically possible. Why is it not metaphysically possible?
Because an actual infinite leads to impossibilities. And since we are talking, and since we are on the topic of beginning of time, an actual infinite cannot be traversed. I gave an example of this. If we start at any point of on a number line, can we ever reach infinity? No,
No, but
that
that
can't
assumes that
happen.
we start from the present. But okay, look, that's not in dispute, right?
No.
So the question, right? The question currently is about
First,
why.
we should finish this point before moving on. We should finish this point before moving on. Otherwise, what's
No,
the point?
this is extremely relevant to the point, right? My question is, what is metaphysically impossible about an infinitely large
First, finish the
universe?
point about infinite being traversed. You are assuming I have a starting point. I don't have a starting point. The negative infinity is not a starting point, but in an eternal past, and we are we are traversing an infinite, actual infinite. We are arriving from negative infinity to zero. That is an actual infinite being traversed. The final point is zero. The initial point is
Why
minus
is
infinity. Zero minus
what?
minus infinity is
Why is
positive infinity. That is being
why is
traversed
the
in an
pre- why
infinite
is the
past.
pre- why is the present 0, and why are we traversing it by just adding 1 year at a time?
We can traverse it by adding 2 years at a time. That doesn't change anything. As for the present being zero, the present can be any point. It is an end point. Before today, in an either in an A theory of time or a B theory of time, an infinite number of days, according to your in an infinite past, an infinite number of events are taking place that cannot end. This is an end point.
No, so
Today, it can be it doesn't have to be zero. It is can be any other number. It is still an ending point.
right, okay. So we start with a negative infinite number of days, and we traverse. But so it's not. There wasn't the point is there wasn't a beginning point. It's not like we started out at negative infinity and then we moved, right? It's just there are an infinite number of days. We didn't reach them by going 1 day at a time, starting at negative infinity.
Even if there is no starting point, an infinite is still being traversed. That is the thing which is impossible. It cannot happen. Even if there is no starting point. Why does if there was a starting point, then it wouldn't be infinite. I mean, this
But
seems
no,
like a
we're not. No
contradiction
one's.
saying an infinite is a starting point.
We're not saying an infinite is being traversed because the point is it's not being traversed, right? Particularly on the B theory.
Of course,
But,
it's
so no, okay. To clear this up, so can you? This is relevant. I'll explain how in a moment. But just can you explain what's metaphysically impossible about an infinitely large universe?
an actual infinite. First, I have to ask a question before that. Is this an is this infinitely large universe just always large, like static, or is it expanding from initial somewhere point going to infinitely large?
It just starts out infinitely large.
Well, an actual infinite cannot exist. Lead to certain impossibilities.
Okay, so
Would you
you've
like
given
me to give an example?
so the impossibilities that you've given have been about traversing an actually infinite number of days. So do you think that there's what would be the
I would
impossibility
like to
that's
give examples
related
of an
to?
infinite possibility.
Wait, sorry, your audio is not great. Can you repeat that?
Yeah, the examples I gave till now are about traversing an actual infinite, right? Now I would like to give example why an actual infinite itself is it leads to impossibilities. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's suppose we have a bookshelf with an infinite number of books, right? Now
Yeah.
there are infinite number of even books on the shelf and an infinite number of odd books in the shelf. Let's suppose we were to take all the even number books of the shelf. How many books are left on the shelf? Infinite. All the odd number of books. We subtract an infinite number of books from an infinite number of books, and we have an infinite number of books. Now, let's suppose you were to instead of just taking the even number books of the shelf, let's suppose we took all the books from the shelf. Yeah, now we are subtracting
Yeah.
an infinite number of books from an infinite number of books. What is the answer? How many books are left on the shelf? Zero. So we subtracted the one number from another number twice, one amount from another amount twice, and got two different results. That's impossible. We can subtract any number from any number from another number, and we will also always have the same result. So this shows that infinite is
Well,
metaphysically
no.
impossible.
Well, no. What you just gave a scenario. What's impossible about that? Like, if we have two infinite overlapping sets, and then we subtract out half of, and so we have one infinite set that's comprised of two other infinite sets, and then we subtract out one of those infinite sets, and we would still have an infinite number of things. If you subtract out both, then you would not have an infinite number of things.
Okay, here's what is impossible about this scenario. We are subtracting same amount from same an amount one from an amount two and getting two different answers. That's impossible. Subtracting, for example, subtracting two from five will always result in three. That will always happen. It will never be four. One more thing, we are discussing whether an actual infinite can apply to reality. We are not discussing whether it is mathematically valid or not. We are conflating the two things.
Well, I'm not conflating them at all. But so you're I'm not making claims about it being possible mathematically, but therefore it must be possible in reality, right? My claim is just that I don't think that there's any contradiction about infinity, right? So if you have infinities and you subtract them from each other, depending on exactly how you do transfinite arithmetic, you'll get different results. But that's not contradictory, depending on which infinity you're subtracting out.
I didn't use the word contradiction. I use the word impossibilities and subtracting the same
Yeah, well,
number
I didn't see what's impossible about it.
from the same number.
Yeah, I don't think it's impossible. But okay.
Can
But
we get two numbers when we subtract two different versions when we subtract?
well, you're assuming that all infinites are of equal size, which they're not.
Even if they are not, how does that change this point? If we subtract one particular amount from another particular amount, when will we ever get different results? That won't happen. Let's suppose we
Well, no. So
subtract 3
we're
from
subtracting
7.
it from
That answer
we're
will always be 4. It will never be 5. It will never be 2.
right, but you're equivocating on infinites because these are different infinites that have different values, and so that wouldn't be relevant there, right? So if we like, and even if there are some operations that can't be done with infinity, the same is true of zero. You can't divide by zero, but that doesn't mean that you can't have zero things. The fact that some mathematical operations can't be done with particular
Okay.
things doesn't mean that they're metaphysically impossible.
Okay, you are making 2 points. Let me address each of them. Yeah. First,
Okay.
as for the point about different sizes of infinity subtracting, even those have their own set of laws. For example, I don't remember the exact names, but we each subtract one size of infinity from another infinity. That result is always same. It doesn't change. That result is the same either way. This is for the point about different sizes of infinity. As for the point about zero, how does dividing by zero, how does that lead to metaphysical impossibilities like the example I gave? Yeah, how does that lead to problems when applying to real world? an actual infinite number of things leads to problems when we apply to real world. How does dividing by zero lead to problems and possibilities in the real world?
Well, so if you have one thing and you divide it into 0 groups, that's metaphysically impossible. But in terms of your first point about infinities, so there are different things we're discussing. So on the one hand, there are categorically greater infinities. So like some infinities just are categorically greater than others. But what I'm talking about is the same order of infinity, but just one infinity that's comprised of two other infinities that are overlapping sets. And so if you subtract out all the odd books, so it would be one infinity that's comprised of two other infinite overlapping sets, that you subtract out the things that overlap, which is one way of doing transfinite arithmetic, and then you get still infinite. Right, so I don't see what's problematic about that.
Okay, 2 points. Firstly, how do you divide?
Are you okay?
I have.
Are you good?
I have a cough. Give me a minute.
Yeah, no problem.
I'm back. My apologies.
Okay, yeah, no problem.
Okay. There were 2 points being made, right? First was the point about dividing about zero. How does that lead to impossibilities in the real world? We can't divide by zero mathematically, but how is that an issue in the real world?
Well, you can't split something into 0 groups in the real world, but that doesn't mean that 0 can't exist in the real world. There are just some operations that can't be done with it.
It doesn't mean, but how does applying zero to the division by zero to real world lead to impossibilities?
Well, I think I just explained that. Right? You cannot divide things by 0, because if you had things by 0, dividing by n as n goes to 0, the thing divided by 0 goes to infinity. And so at 0, it would be infinity. And you just in the real world, you can't divide something into 0 groups.
Okay, that is the mathematical part. How does that lead to impossibilities
Well, in the real world, you can't divide things.
I mean, how does that cause problems like and
well, the point
okay,
is
but
even
how is that a problem? How does that lead to impossibilities?
Yeah, so the point was just that even
In
if
the
we
example
can't,
of in the
well, right,
example of an
so
actual infinite number of things,
the impossibilities is that in the real world you can't divide things
in
into
the
0
point
groups.
about an actual
It would
infinite
be
number of
impossible.
things, I gave an example of how that leads to impossibilities. We can't use that operation in the real world, but how does that lead to impossibilities? In the example of
Well,
an
if
actual
it can't,
infinite number of things, that leads to impossibilities.
well, right, so if we try, it's not clear how it would be metaphysically impossible to divide by 0 in the real
We
world.
can't divide
Even
it.
if we did it, but even if we did it, it would lead to an infinite number of things. And so if that's impossible, then dividing by 0 is impossible.
It's not clear how it's metaphysically impossible. You said that yourself. Again, the issue with this is how does it lead to impossibilities? There is no way this leads to impossibility. We can't divide by zero.
I think I've
Okay.
just explained like
How
8
does that
times how it
do
does.
anything to?
Because it would result in an actually infinite number of things, which you say is
No,
impossible.
you said how
Dividing by 0 would get you
is
infinity.
mathematically an issue. It's impossible because it leads to impossibilities. If something being possible leads to impossible things being possible, that cannot be possible.
Right,
I mean,
exactly. Right, that's why we can't divide by 0. But the point
if
is
an
that
actual
doesn't mean 0 is impossible.
number of things is possible, no, again, that doesn't show zero is impossible, but that's not the point. Point is, how does dividing by zero lead to impossibilities in the real world? Again, it's not, we are not just saying infinite is impossible just because it is, or we can do certain operations with it. We are showing, the TS side is showing with real world examples how this leads to impossibilities. Because
I don't
we
think that
can
you've given
subtract any
impossibilities,
number from
but
any number, other number, and get different results on an actual infinite.
all
We
you're showing is
subtract 8
that you
from
can't.
10, 4. What was the
Okay,
second
all
point?
you're all you're showing is that we can't do addition and subtraction with infinities the way we could with regular numbers. But we can't do division with 0. That doesn't mean 0 is impossible. That's the point. I feel like we're sort of beating a dead horse. If you want to make a final remark on that, we can then move on, because there are other points about the Kalam that I'd be interested in talking about. Hello?
No, I am giving. Okay. My final point would be I am applying an actual the example of what would happen if we have an actual infinite number. And I can give other examples of as well. But you're right, we should move on.
Okay, so in terms of your claim that the universe began to exist, if the B theory of time is true, then there's
What
no
was the
such thing as
second point? We were
beginning.
discussing 2 points. One was the zero thing, and there was another point we were discussing.
The other point was I don't remember, but I think it's worth moving on, because I feel like we sort of covered those points. So in terms of, if the B theory of time is true, then even if the universe is not infinite, then the universe still never began to exist, because there's no such thing as beginning. The universe just exists as this 4-dimensional object with one of its dimensions being temporal.
Not
So
not
that would refute that
necessarily.
premise of the.
We are this argument is theory of time, and I think on eighth theory of time, beginning is given.
Wait, sorry, it's kind of hard. Your audio cut out a little bit. Can you repeat that? Hello?
Not necessarily. B theory of time just shows that these events are happening simultaneously. B theory of time cannot show that these are just is as for always. That is something B theory of time cannot prove. On A theory, we can prove the universe. Okay. Time we can't necessarily prove the universe is eternal or it began to exist. All we can know is that these moments are happening simultaneously. This does nothing to prove or disprove the beginning of time. But on an A theory of time, the beginning
No,
of time is proven beyond reasonable because of the regarding impossibility of an actual.
Yeah, no, I look, that's not in dispute, right? What we're talking about right now. So if we think that the B theory of time is true, then the universe just exists as this four-dimensional object. There wasn't a moment when it began to exist. There wasn't a first moment of time. Each moment of time exists simultaneously. So if that's true, then that would mean
Can you hear me
that,
now?
yes. Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me? Hello?
Yeah.
Okay, so the point, I'm currently not talking about an infinite. The point is just that
I
if the
can
B
hear
theory
you.
of time,
On an
okay, the point is just that if the B theory of time is true, then it's certainly possible for there to be an actually infinite number of, or sorry, not talking about infinite. If the B theory of time is true, then there wasn't a first moment in time. The universe didn't begin to exist because every moment of time is equally real and exists simultaneously.
if a B theory of time is true, that does nothing to prove that the universe is eternal, because I mean all the moments exist simultaneously, right? On a B theory.
I'm not saying the universe is eternal.
Even if it's finite, on a B theory does not show that it had a beginning or it didn't have a beginning. It does nothing. The B theory of time in and of itself does nothing to show that the universe always exists but is finite. It doesn't do that. Even if all the moments are simultaneous, the B theory of time does absolutely nothing to show that those are just always there, that each moment is happening always. That is something B theory of time cannot prove. B theory of time can, in and of itself, it can prove those moments are simultaneous, but it cannot prove those are happening always. However, on an A theory of time, we can prove beyond reasonable doubt that universe began to exist because of the two arguments I gave earlier.
No, so
An actual infinite not being tried.
When you say always, there isn't an always. Time is in some sense an illusion. So there isn't a now. Now exists is just as real as yesterday was, right? So if the B theory of time is true, then that's the correct view of time. And if that's the correct view of time, and every moment of time is real, then the universe didn't begin to exist. There was a moment in time, there was a first moment in time, not in the sense of there was a moment and then moments came after that, but in the sense of sort of like, if you have an object that's extended in space, you'll have like a first point on one side and a last point on the other side. And so there was a first moment of time in that sense. But in the broader sense, the universe didn't begin to exist. It just exists as this four-dimensional block that didn't begin to exist, didn't pop into being. And so, because time is in some sense an illusion on this view. And so if that's true, then both premises of the Kalam are false. It's both the case that things that begin to exist don't have to have causes, and that the universe didn't begin to exist.
I think you are applying an understanding of A theory to the B theory of time, even if there is no cause in the sense of there are no the first initial moment and second initial moment, the second moment, third moment, and fourth moment, and all the moments of in the B theory of time are simultaneous. That does absolutely nothing to show that they have existed for all. They are just that way, or they had a beginning. Again, as for these, the B theory of time cannot prove or disprove the Kalam, the second premise of the Kalam. As for the first premise of Kalam, it is not just proven through experience. Saying something can, the opposite of first premise of Kalam is something can come from nothing. That is irrational. It's like saying 0 can equal 1. It cannot happen. So, the B theory of time.
Okay. Asserting that it's irrational is not an argument. It's true that things don't pop into existence within space-time, but that doesn't mean that space-time itself needs to have an external cause. But the B theory of time does implicate premise 1 of the Kalam, not because it says there are a past number of infinite events, but there isn't. So when you say eternally, there is no such thing as time outside of this 4-dimensional thing, right? So it's just the case that the universe exists as a 4-dimensional block with objects extended in both space and time. Now, if that's true, and objects are extended in both space and time, then the universe just then much like things that have a first point in space don't necessarily need a cause. Things that have a first temporal point, so to speak, don't necessarily need a cause.
I think I'm forgetting one of the points you made earlier in this earlier when you were speaking now. But as for the beat theory of time, it still does nothing to show that universe is always it. It just shows that all the moments are time are simultaneous. Whether that simultaneity is always there, that is not proven by the B theory of time.
Wait,
In and
when
of
you say
itself, it cannot
always,
do that.
so there isn't time outside of outside of these particular moments along, like, so the question of whether it's always been there is ill-conceived, because on the B theory of time, things haven't always or not always been there. Time just doesn't exist outside of this sort of 4-dimensional block that we're describing. And so it's not the case that it always has or never have existed. There's no objective time that exists outside of this 4-dimensional block.
The B theory of time does nothing in and of itself to show that the block you are mentioning is eternal or not, that it always exists or not. The B theory of time in and of itself just shows that time in the sense of temporal becoming is an illusion that past, present, and future are happening simultaneously. Whether that block is it always is or it isn't, it began to exist, it didn't begin to exist, that is something B theory of time in and of itself cannot prove. You will have to bring extra arguments for that. As for the point about whatever beginning to exist requires a cause, let's say
Wait. Sorry,
for argument's sake,
can I respond to just the point that you just made? But we can talk more about the premise that things that begin to exist have a cause later. But I think that let's just hone in on this point about the B theory of time before we jump around and talk about things beginning to exist needing a cause. Okay. Okay. So so you're repeating yourself, right? But I don't so the point is that it's not like it existed eternally or not eternally. There just is no such thing as time that exists outside of this 4-dimensional block. And so it wasn't created at a moment of time. The universe just has a temporal dimension the same way it has a spatial dimension. And so just repeating the claim that it doesn't address whether or not that 4-dimensional block is eternal is non-responsive, because the point is that there isn't such thing as time outside of this 4-dimensional block. The time only exists relative to particular points in space.
it seems like in your claim you are assuming that seem like you're making the same assumption that atheists make when they say God cannot create without time. Seems the same assumption is being made. Whether that block just is or it began to exist, that is something B theory of time cannot prove. Again, B theory of time is limited to within that block. I mean, this is like saying that science can address things beyond the universe. It can't. Science is limited to things within the universe. Yeah, that cannot happen. How can B theory of time disprove or prove things that exist beyond that block? B theory of time is within that block. It cannot prove or disprove things outside of the beyond that block. That can't happen
Okay,
as far as
the
the
block
beginning or
the block didn't on the B theory of time, the block didn't begin to exist. The notion of beginning to exist is not a notion that makes any sense on the B theory of time, except in the limited sense of something being influenced by other things. On the B theory of time, they're just much like something will have a series of, like my arm will have a series of will be comprised of a series of points throughout space. On the B theory of time, things are also have a series of points throughout time. So they exist at different things in different time. But the universe is just this four-dimensional block, and the notion of time outside of it does not matter. And so you keep making the claim that it doesn't address whether time outside of it is eternal. But the point is that there's no such thing as time outside of the outside of the universe on the B theory of time, because time only exists relative to points in time. Only exists relative to points in space-time, rather.
B theory of time is about within that block. You cannot apply to outside of that block. Seems like the fallacy of composition that earlier you were saying, that just because there is causation within the universe, that means that causation has to be out of it. That, I mean, you are doing the same thing here. The B theory of time can only address things within that block. It does absolutely nothing to show whether outside that block there is a beginning, there is not a beginning, it just is, it isn't, whether a god or a cause of the universe can create without time or with time. Those questions are not addressed by the B theory of time. B theory of time cannot address that. B theory of time, just like A or any other theory of time, it can just show how time is. It cannot talk about things outside its scope. It does nothing to rule out beginning of the universe in the sense of it didn't exist and it did exist, then it did exist. It cannot do that.
Right.
Even if B theory of time.
Yeah, so I would agree with you about that. I don't think that the B theory of time. I don't think that the B theory of time would rule out the spatiotemporal block having a cause. That's not my claim. My claim is not that it rules out. My claim is just that it doesn't need it. Because you're saying that your premise is that things that begin to exist have to have a cause. But on the B theory of time, the universe didn't begin to exist in any sense, given that the universe just is this block. And what we think of as beginning to exist is just points along this sort of spatiotemporal sort of four-dimensional block. And so as a result, the concept of beginning to exist is not coherent on the B theory of time.
I think the point you put on the B theory of time, it is not necessary that the universe began to exist. That doesn't mean we can say whether the universe began to exist or not. That is something on the B theory of time we cannot prove using only philosophical arguments. But on the A theory of time, which is what my argument assumes, we can prove it very, very easily from the points about an actual infinite being relevant and an actual infinite being impossible.
Okay, so I don't think that the A theory of time gets you out of it for the reasons that I discussed before, but you just seem to agree that on the B theory of time, we don't need a beginning. And so if the B theory of time is true, then the Kalam loses its force, because we don't need the universe to have begun to exist. And so you would have to argue for the A theory of time. The B theory of time is a consensus view and is supported by recent findings in relativity. It's not clear how gravity could bend time if there was an objective present. And it seems like generally in sort of complex physics matters like this, we should defer to the consensus, because none of us are physicists.
Okay, a few points. Firstly, I've been saying that point from the start regarding the B theory of time, that it does nothing to prove or disprove a beginning of time. Secondly, my argument assumes A theory of time. Thirdly, as to the point of proving A or B theory of time and relativity disproving
it. To those points.
Let me give an example. Okay, you respond to 2 points, then I will address relativity.
Yeah, so in terms of the first point, so the B theory of time doesn't need any time that exists outside of it. And so on the B theory of time, you can just posit that the universe is this self-contained state and that it exists eternally in the sense that there's no time outside of it. Time, there isn't an objective time, there isn't an objective present, time just exists relatively. And so that's a response to the first point. The second point about how the Kalam assumes the A theory of time, well, that's fine, but then if the A theory of time is false, then the Kalam doesn't work. Okay, go ahead and make the third point, or if you want to respond to what I said, go ahead.
Yeah. Okay, Kalam is about the A theory of time. Secondly, about the B theory of time, we cannot say it just is.
But the A theory of time is false.
We cannot just say, yeah?
Yeah, we have reason to believe that the A theory of time is false, which is why that's a consensus view among physicists and philosophers of time.
I don't think there's a consensus on this issue, but first let me
There
address
is.
the
I
point
sent you
about
the
B theory
source
of time
earlier.
and relativity.
I
Yeah,
sent you
that's
the
one
source
reference,
earlier
but
for
there's
that claim.
as well. I mean, both positions are taken among philosophers. But let me address the point about B theory first. B theory in and of itself does nothing to prove or disprove beginning of the universe. It cannot. We can only apply again. B theory can apply within that block. It can never apply outside of that block. That would be a fallacy of composition. As for the point
Right.
about relativity, let's
But,
suppose.
but well, sorry, just real fast. But that once again, that's not in dispute, right? I'm not saying that the B theory of time can rule out the possibility of there being something that creates it. I'm just saying that the B theory of time means that we don't need the universe to have begun to exist. And so, if the B theory of time is true, then the universe doesn't need to have begun to exist, which means that we can provide a perfectly adequate account of how the universe exists, because we just don't need to have God to explain the universe beginning to exist. And so, it's not an argument against God; it's just a response to your argument for God.
Well, I'm not
Okay, go
making this
ahead and
argument on
either
a B theory, so
well, but if the B
okay.
theory of time is
As to the
true, then
point,
if the B theory of time is true, then if your argument assumes the A theory, then your argument doesn't work.
yeah, that's why I'm not making this on B theory. I'm making on the A theory. Let me
But if you're
address the
making it on
point
the A
about the
theory and the A
relativity.
theory is false, then it doesn't work.
Yeah. For that, you have to
Like
prove A theory is false, but that's a later topic. Let me address the point about relativity. Yeah.
Okay.
Let me address the point about relativity. Let's say, from my perspective, when 2 days pass, yeah, from someone else's perspective, 10 days pass. From another observer's perspective. Okay. Whenever the further back we go in time, from either perspective, for the same reason, an actual infinite cannot be proven. The same arguments apply. That does nothing to prove or disprove the A theory of time. How can it? Even the original Einstein's original theory had an A theory of relativity, had A theory as an assumption. The B theory came later than that. So relativity in and of itself does absolutely nothing to disprove the A theory of time. Okay.
Yeah. So in terms of analyzing the A theory of time, so it's going to get into some very complicated matters in philosophy of time and physics that I think neither of us are qualified to address. So I think that generally we should refer to the consensus. It seems to be that the B theory of time is true.
Yeah. Either of us are not qualified to address, but let me answer. Just first, we should realize what B theory of time is saying. It is saying our entire experience of time is an illusion. I mean,
well, it's an
that's
illusion in one.
just irrational. Even if scientists say that, it is saying that our entire experience of time is an illusion. I mean, we are using our minds to do science and philosophy, but then we can't trust our minds. I mean, this seems like stupidity.
Well, okay, so I mean, it's an illusion in a limited sense. So it's an illusion in that there's no objective present, but it's no more like time. Time is real in the sense that they're like things are causally connected with each other, and the things exist at different moments in time, the same way that they exist at different moments in space. It's just the objective present that's an illusion. But I don't understand what points towards an objective present that exists. But I mean, I honestly like. There are some topics that I think that lay people like us just are not worth discussing with them because they're sufficiently complicated matters of physics that we just can't really know very much about whether or not they're true. And so I would tend
Yeah, this is a
to.
complicated topic.
Wait,
This
sorry, can you
this
repeat
is a
that, please?
complicated topic. I agree. This is a complicated topic, but we should understand what it's saying. I mean, B theory of time, temporal becoming is an illusion, but we experience temporal becoming, and we can see it. And from our point of view, it is a self-evident truth. Self-evident truth. can't deny that. I mean, how that point about temporal becoming and things actually changing, past being real and it happening, then present happening in a sequence, we can experience that. On B theory of time, all of that is an illusion, and you didn't address the second point. To do science, we have to trust our mind. If B theory is true, we cannot trust our minds.
The
I
B
mean,
theory, the B theory of time does not reject the
that seems like
observation. Well, no, the B theory of time does not say that that we are like hallucinating the experience of time, but we don't observe an objective present. We just at particular moments, we observe causality, and we have the perception that there is a time, and at any moment that we exist, there is in fact a point in time at which that's true. The same way that there is a point in space, and so when you say that it's an illusion, I think that's sort of misleading. But I mean, if you're willing to, yeah, I mean, I just generally think that sort of in complicated matters like this relating to the A theory and B theory of time, much like I would not like stake out a position on which view of quantum physics is correct. It would seem arrogant to just on a complicated issue of physics to stake out a particular view that's not in line with the consensus. I think that the consensus of philosophers of time and of physicists are much better qualified to evaluate this than you or I. And it's not just like an obvious nonsense that the B theory of time is false. It is a complicated issue, but it doesn't deny any facet of our experiences.
Okay, let me address that point. Firstly, I'm not saying it is a simple point. It is a very complicated point. Secondly,
sorry, just real fast. I think we've been covering the B theory of time for a little while. So after you make this point, I think it might make sense to wrap up and move on to another point, because the Kalam is just such a deep topic. There's so much to discuss, and there are a lot more points that I want to get to. But so, yeah. Sorry, good.
Okay. Firstly, this topic of what time is the nature of time. This is a very complicated topic. I agree, but on a B theory of time, there is a sense of our experience of time being an illusion. Even if we don't see on a B theory of time itself is not an illusion. Still, our experience of time is an illusion. Even if it's not hallucination, it is still false. Our experience of temporal becoming is false on a B theory of time. And to do science and philosophy, we have to trust our minds. But if B theory of time is true, our minds are telling us false things. I mean, this invalidates science and philosophy itself. That's the issue with first issue with B theory of time, major issue. Second issue, the A theory of time is our common sense view of time. It is self-evidently true. I mean, and scientific consensus can change. It does change a lot, and relativity does absolutely nothing to disprove the A theory of time. So we cannot just simply ignore our collective, our self-evident truth because few scientists say so. I mean, to do science, we have to trust our minds. But if B theory is true, our minds are telling us false things. That is a major issue with B theory of time. Now we can move to the next topic.
Yeah, wait, sorry. Actually, would you mind if I just address that real fast? If you want to say something after that, but you just raised a point that I would really like to address about this. But yeah, if you have something you want to say after, that's fine. Okay, so I mean, I think that so often we have scientific observations that disconfirm what we thought at first. At first, it seemed like the Earth was flat. Turns out that the Earth's not flat. At first, it seems like disease was not caused by bacteria. Now we know that disease is caused by bacteria and viruses, of course, and other things. At first, we thought evolution wasn't true. At first, we thought evolution wasn't true. It turns out that evolution is true. And so the fact that a scientific theory isn't what disconfirms the way that something seems doesn't mean the scientific theory is false. Otherwise, we'd have to throw out nearly all of science, because lots of science is pretty unintuitive, including like all of quantum physics. And so I think that the distinction would be if a theory requires denying, like saying that some element of our experiences is like we're not actually experiencing what we think we're experiencing, then that would count against it. But the B theory of time doesn't deny our experiences. It just provides a more full account of how we have the types of experiences that we happen to have.
Okay.
Do you want to make
Let
a
me
last
just
point on that?
attempt.
If not, we can move on.
Yeah, B theory of time does say some of our experiences are specifically false, like the temporal becoming. It does say that those specific experiences are explicitly false. As for the point about science changing, I never said entire theory or everything in science can be false. I'm not saying that, but science can and does change a lot. Take an example of mutations. Earlier we thought all mutations are random. Now new studies show all mutations are not random. I mean, science does change. You cannot deny this fact. It's proven through numerous examples. Now we should move to the next topic.
So you said the thing that common. So your arguments for the first premise about things that begin to exist having to have a cause was that you think that it's confirmed by common experience, and you think that it's just it's just intuitively obvious. Otherwise, it's like saying that 0 equals 1. Well, I don't understand what would be illogical about it. I don't think that you can articulate anything about it that's illogical. And in terms of the point about common experience, of course, confirms that things within space and time don't begin to exist, but the things within space and time don't apply to space and time itself. And so a generalization that can explain all our experiences is everything which begins to exist within space-time has to have a cause, but that doesn't say anything about space-time itself. So yeah, what would you say about that?
I did specifically say it is not just about experience. Yeah, I acknowledge the point that just because we experience something in the universe, that doesn't necessarily mean it is outside of the universe the same way. But this is not just about experience. Of course, it's like saying 0 equals 1 causally before the beginning of the universe, there is absolutely nothing. That something pops up out of nothing. This is worse than magic. In when someone a magician is doing magic, there's a bunny, there's a hat. Here there is just absolutely nothing. It just pops out of absolutely nothing. This is just nonsense.
Well,
Do you
so
wanna talk second premise?
well, so I don't think it's nonsense, right? Like, so the way you make it sound is like there was just nothing that was sitting there for a while and then just something popped into being, right? But the point is, if there isn't, it's not that there was nothing that was just like hanging around and then something started to exist. It's that there wasn't anything prior to the universe, and so it wasn't like there wasn't like a pool of nothing and then the universe popped into being from there. It was just that the universe was the beginning of everything, and came into being a finite time ago, and there was obviously no time prior to the universe, which is space-time. So so I don't think that point applies.
Okay, 2 points. Firstly, you said universe is the beginning of everything. You are assuming that only things exist within the universe. You cannot prove that assumption. Second point, again,
Wait. Sorry.
you are
Sorry.
assuming.
I just wait. Sorry, I just didn't hear what you said. Can you repeat that?
Yeah, you said universe. Beginning of the universe is beginning of everything. Yeah, you cannot prove that. You are assuming that only things exist within the universe, but you cannot actually prove that. That's just a baseless assumption. Second point about
Wait. Sorry. Just for clarification on that first point, you're saying I'm assuming that the only things that exist in the universe. Is that what you said? Or
you said that the beginning of the universe is beginning of everything. You did say this, right?
Right. So I'm saying that. So if I'm not saying I'm committed to that, but I'm saying that is that is a possibility, right? So I'm saying that even if we grant
There are a lot
B
of
theory of time is
possibilities.
false, I'm saying even if we grant that the B theory of time is false, even if we grant that you can't have infinite past things, and we say that the universe just came that it just didn't come from anything. I'm saying that I think that if the universe is all there is, I don't see what's the problem about that. And so, maybe it's possible that there was something before the universe. But remember, to the extent that your supporting premises require theism to be true, and there are arguments for theism, then that's just going to be the begging the question fallacy. So
if you're not assuming if it's a possibility, there are many possibilities. We should mention all of them to just be fair. You won't mention all of them. I want it to be a waste of time. If it's just a possibility and you're not using this as an argument, why mention it? First point. So,
no. So
as for the
I'm
point
not
about
I'm not saying that I think it's definitely true. I'm saying that it might be true. So there are a bunch of. So I think that the Kalam rests on a series of assumptions, none of which I think can be established with confidence. So I think that maybe the universe began to exist. Maybe things that begin to exist have to have a cause, and maybe if it had a cause, it has to be God. But I don't think that any of those premises can be firmly established. And so my credence in all of the premises of the Kalam being true together is incredibly low.
Yeah, that's your position. But in a debate, in a discussion about what is true or at least what is rational, we are stuck with arguments and things that can be proven, which is why I'm arguing for it. Your second contention regarding the beginning to exist, whatever begins to as a cause was that, it seemed like a version of that how can God create without time? But that is assuming that cause of the universe needs time to create. What is that assumption based on? Not anything. Uh, do you have another contention against the premise one of the Kalam, or we can move to premise two?
Well, no. So I don't see a good reason to accept this that this is true. That things that begin to exist have to have a cause.
You didn't address the point about something coming from nothing being like zero can equal one.
I don't understand. I don't see why it is like saying that 0 can equal 1.
Okay, here's why it is
Right?
like
Zero,
saying 0 can equal 1. Yeah.
Why
Here's
is it
why
like
it's like
saying that?
0 can. Okay, because causally before the beginning of the universe, yeah, not temporarily, causally before the beginning of the universe, what exists? Absolutely nothing. 0. After beginning of the universe, what exists? Something. 1. A universe. Which is why it's like saying 0 equals 1. And to the point about you said
Sorry.
about
Why
universe
is
popping
the
into.
fact that you had something when there wasn't something? Well, the concept of before doesn't make sense because we're talking about the origin of space-time, so there wasn't the notion of before space-time is incoherent. But why is it like saying 0 is equal to 1?
As for the about concept of before not making sense, I'm not saying it's a before in the temporal sense. I'm saying it's before in a causal sense. It is like 0 equaling 1 because causally before the beginning of the universe there is absolutely nothing. 0 if there is no cause. Yeah. 0. And after causally after the beginning of the universe there is something, a universe. 1, which is why it's like saying 0 equals 1.
Well, but obviously if you add something to 0, if you add 1 to 0, then you get 1. And so the point is that you just one point is that there wasn't a before. It wasn't like there was a moment when there was nothing and then there started being something. This time didn't even exist, right? But also 0 plus 1 equals 1. And so if we think that the universe didn't need a cause, then it's not saying that nothing is the same as something. It's that something didn't come from anything. Right? I came from my parents, but I'm not the same as my parents.
I don't see the relevance of that, but I have to address the other 2 points here. Firstly, you are saying 0 plus 1 is 1, right? but there has to be a plus one. If there is absolutely nothing before the universe, there is no cause, there is no plus one. It is just zero equaling one. As for the point about there being no time, I didn't say it was temporally before, I said it was causally before. I mean, you are assuming that there, nothing can act beyond time, nothing can be before time. You cannot prove those assumptions.
Well, no. So the
Seem
notion
like the
of
same fallacy of composition because we are bound by time. We need time to, yeah, we are limited by time. We change by time. But why does the cause of the universe need to be bound by time?
um, well, no. So the notion of before time doesn't make sense because before is a temporal notion, right?
I said causally before. I specifically said not temporally before. We don't have a word for
Okay.
causally before because that
Well,
is
causally
not in our
before, right?
everyday experience.
Right. So if there was something
We don't have a
causally
word, specific
before,
word for it.
yeah. So if there was something causally before time that caused time to exist, then that wouldn't be a rejection of this premise. That would be a rejection of the premise that that would be agreeing that the universe, as in space-time, had a cause. That would just be saying that it wasn't God, right? But so my claim currently, I'm just defending the possibility of a universe that didn't have a cause. But if you want, and we should get to this at some point, we should talk about whether or not if the universe had a cause, that cause had to be God. Because I don't think it did.
Yeah, but I think I've been there for more than an hour, right? So we should stick to the Kalam for now. The whether
No,
that causes
this isn't.
the universe.
Well, the sorry, this is the column. You said your version of the column was premise one: the universe had a cause. Premise two: if it had a cause, it was God. Right. So
No, I
the
never
premise.
said that.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Then I think I misremembered.
Actually,
But
I
okay.
said the beginning of the universe proves universe has a cause. Fine tuning shows that cause is an intelligent creator. I didn't go to God yet. I just went to
Okay.
an
So
intelligent creator. I just want to address the point about. Uh, I actually
yeah, go
forgot
ahead.
what was the last point you made before.
Well, the point that
What
I
was the
made
last
was
point you
that
made before?
so the point that I made was that there was the notion of so if the universe uh had if there was something that was causally prior to the universe, then that would be agreeing that the universe had a cause. So that wouldn't be addressing the premise that we're currently talking about, which is the notion that the universe would have had to have a cause.
Then we should talk about that premise then instead of this. The universe has to have a cause. The beginning of the universe is on and a theory is proven by the arguments I gave earlier. The universe necessarily needing a cause is proven by its opposite being irrational, and that's proven by it being like zero saying that zero can equal one. That cannot
Yeah.
happen
So
for the reason I gave.
right. So I obviously dispute all of the premises, but I think it would be worth moving on to talk about the premise that says that if the universe had a cause, its cause was an intelligent creator. Because you said you had to go in like an hour and a half, right? So that's in like 12 minutes from now, right? So because I think that is an
Okay.
interesting premise and it's worth discussing. Um, so so why, if the universe had a cause, does it need to be an intelligent creator?
Okay, here's the reason. This is proven basically through the fine-tuning arguments. There are about 26 constant universal constants. If they didn't have a specific value, a complex life-permitting universe would not exist. As far as I know, about six of those 26 constants are within a specific range, but the other 20 have to have very specific values. If either of them doesn't have their specific value, exact specific value, a complex life-permitting universe would not exist. The odds of something like this happening is like say like the amount of number 1 over amount of numbers. on a number line times 26 because these constants can conceivably have any other value. And because the universe began to exist, there is absolutely nothing necessary about any of these constants.
Right. So um so I think that a multiverse is able to explain fine tuning. And a multiverse is widely favored in physics given that it explains other phenomena. So there are explanations for lots of iterations of the universe, some of which will be finely tuned for life. And so if we believe in a multiverse, then that explains fine tuning, and we don't need God. Or sorry, we don't need an intelligent creator.
Okay, there are three problems with the multiverse theory. Firstly, science is limited to things within the universe, within space and time. Yeah, multiverse is by definition outside of space and time. So any argument for a multiverse won't be based on science. It would be based on philosophy, and simply Occam's razor will refute it because why are we postulating a almost infinite number of universes
Well,
instead of
yeah.
just one creator? Another point.
So let me address this. So in terms of the first point, about uh how science can't address it. Well, science can address things outside of the universe, right? Given that with scientific models, we come up with the simplest way of explaining the fundamental laws of physics. And so if the simplest explanation of the fundamental laws of physics just involves, for example, particles moving according to Schrödinger equations, which just naturally results in decoherence over time, resulting in a multiverse, then that means that our best theory just naturally predicts the emergence of a multiverse. And this is how the multiverse theories work. But also, even if it's not a provable in a scientific sense, we can still have a multiverse theory, right? We can't, maybe even if we can't prove it scientifically, the point is just that the multiverse theory is a perfectly reasonable hypothesis that can explain fine tuning. And the point about Occam's razor isn't true because Occam's razor relates to the simplicity of the assumptions. The assumptions leading to the multiverse are very simple. So they just particles according to the Schrödinger equations will naturally result in a multiverse over time. And so the Schrödinger equations are very simple. And so much like it wouldn't make any sense to say that, well, God can't exist because God would have to create all these things and these are unlikely. That wouldn't make any sense because it's about how simple God is, and then the rest of the things follow from God existing. And so similarly, a multiverse, you get it by very simple starting points. And there are lots of simple starting points that you can use to get a multiverse.
Okay. Firstly, the point about the different scientific models. Again, all of them are assuming that things outside the universe are similar to things within the universe. Again, a fallacy of composition would apply, so that point will not work. As for the point about Occam's razor, what is simpler are infinite number of universes or one creator? Again, one creator is simpler, and the point about the scientific equation again that comes up. Those are assuming things outside of the universe are similar to things within the universe. That assumption can never be proven.
Yeah, so they're not assuming that things outside the universe are the same as things inside the universe. They just say that if we have things inside of the universe obeying simple, predictable natural laws, that naturally results in a multiverse. Otherwise, you have to engage in special pleading to explain why there's decoherence and the collapse of the wave function. But there are lots of ways of doing it. And so the point is just we want a theory that gives us the best explanation of how we get the universe the way that it is. And if the best explanation is a multiverse, then we shouldn't hesitate to accept a multiverse. In terms of the point about Occam's razor, I think that you just sort of repeated your original point without addressing my counter argument, which is that Occam's razor doesn't rule out a multiverse because the point is not that it just posits millions of universes for no reason. Just like with independent laws of physics with no underlying account. The point is that you have this very simple rule that naturally gives way to a multiverse. And so much like it would make no sense to say that Genghis Khan couldn't have existed because he had so many children, and so it's not simple to say that he had this huge effect. It similarly doesn't make sense to say that a multiverse doesn't exist because we're not positing a multiverse. We're positing simple laws that naturally result in a multiverse.
Okay. Uh, If I miss anything, just remind me. Yeah. Firstly, your point about simple laws and anything from science, again, that is assuming the same thing, that things outside the universe are similar to things within the universe. That is still assuming that if that assumption was not being made, then these models could not have been made. So that assumption
No,
is baseless. So
no, the, the models don't assume that. I don't know where you're getting the notion that the models assume that.
of course they assume
The
that
point is
if they
just
didn't assume
that
that what models of course assume that they are scientific models, they are basing it on things outside the universe to think being similar to things within the universe. If they are not assuming that, where are they getting our frame of reference from for how things are outside the universe? If they don't have a
also
frame of reference for that, what are they're basing their models from? They won't have a models if they didn't have certain assumptions and preconceived notions of how things would be outside the universe, and they don't have any other frame of reference than things within the universe. As for the point about I think the
well,
point your point
wait,
of
sorry, I
relating.
sorry. I feel like we've been doing a decent amount as we've been sort of like hitting a lot of points. So like I'll make a bunch of points, you'll make a bunch of points. I think it makes more sense to just sort of focus on one specific point. So before we move back to the bigger picture, I just want to address this point about the the multiverse assuming things about operating outside the universe. So that's not true at all. The point is just that if we say that the laws of physics work the way that we expect them to work based on the simplest model that explains our observations in physics, then that naturally would result in the existence of a multiverse. So if particles move according to the Schrodinger equation, as per the many worlds interpretation, that leads to a multiverse. Nothing else needed.
All of that is assuming is basing things on how things are within the universe. Again, to build any model, to do anything, they need to have a frame of reference. The only frame of reference they have is for things within the universe. How are they going to confirm that things outside the universe are same as things within the universe? They cannot do that, which is why this claim is not a scientific argument. Any argument for multiverse must be philosophical. Second point, the thing about Occam's razor. Your argument against you are making two points against my claim about Occam's razor, right? First was based on science. Against that is addressed to the point I made. The second point was just because it's simple, it doesn't make it false. Okay, but still, Occam razor is a valid philosophical principle and it exists for a reason. And positing an infinite number of universes is much potentially infinite times as many complex as positing a single creator. Let me just give two other issues with the multiverse as well. Firstly,
Wait. Sorry, but
actually, one other issue.
before you give those two other issues, can I just respond to the things that you just said?
Yeah,
Okay. So, in terms of the point about how it requires positing things outside the universe work the same way, I feel like I'm repeating myself, but I think you're not addressing the argument. So, no, it doesn't. It's just that if things work in the universe the way that we expect them to work and the way that our simplest models predict they work, that naturally results in a multiverse over time, as per the many world interpretation of quantum mechanics. In terms of the point about it being complex, that's not true. The multiverse is the result of very simple laws. And we don't look at the complexity of the end result of something. We look at the complexity of the starting assumptions. And the starting assumptions are very simple, and there are ways of getting very complex multiverse from very simple starting things, like strings, according to versions of superstring theory, like multiple worlds, according to the Schrodinger equation, etc.
all of that is assuming things outside the universe are a particular way, even if they are assuming it's a simpler way based on how things are inside the universe. Again, they cannot prove that things outside the universe are similar to things within the universe. They always have to have a frame of reference in mind, any reference in mind. But how can they be sure that any reference that they have is similar to what is outside the universe? They can never be sure, which is why this is not an argument from science, rather this is a philosophical argument. And if your point about multiverse being more complex is based on science, then that is addressed already here to this point. Second
Well,
point,
no, I mean,
and this is
so
another
I feel like I've already, yeah, I think I've already addressed that, but okay. Sorry, good.
okay. Here is the second issue with the multiverse. Suppose this universe was caused by another previous universe. That universe was caused by a previous universe. The number of universes in that causal chain cannot be infinite, as that would lead to an infinite regress, which is impossible. Would you like me to give an example for why an infinite regress is impossible?
No, it's fine. I think we covered that point before, but so
Okay.
if we say that there's something that there are some timeless and spaceless physical laws that bring about the existence of a universe and operate atemporally, I don't understand what's impossible about that.
It's not about what's being possible or impossible. It's just a simple issue that we don't know what is outside the universe. And any frame of reference we will pick,
Right, but I
simpler one, complex one, or any other way, how can we be sure that it is the same outside of the universe? We can't know that anyway. There is no way possible for us to know what is outside the universe. We can induce certain things like there being a cause from basic rational points, but we can't say if things are similar to where they are, if they're simple, if they're whatever. How can we be sure that things outside the universe they are the same laws, same rules, same things apply as within the universe? We can't, which is why multiverse is not an argument from science, it is an argument from philosophy. And the second point is, for the same reason, an infinite regress is impossible. There, even in a multiverse, there is no way to avoid an absolute beginning.
Yeah,
And
so
as for
I well no, so if the laws are timeless and spaceless, then or if there are timeless and spaceless laws or something physical or something else that results in the origin of the universe, then that can bring about the existence of then that can explain how we have this multiverse, which is a vast ensemble of universes, one of which is this one, right? So that account seems eminently possible. Um, but on top of that, you made the claim that you think we can't know about things outside the universe. Well, I'm not saying that we can. I'm not saying that we know that the multiverse is true. I'm just saying that you're making the claim that it has to be this one thing, namely God, and I'm saying that there are lots of other things that it could be, including a multiverse. That's just one of them. There are a multitude of other things that we can talk about later. Wait, sorry.
okay,
Just for reference, just for reference, how much time do you have? Because I thought earlier you mentioned you'd have to wrap up after like an hour and a half. So
I have 10 minutes.
I'm
We can.
sorry.
I have
you said 10
5 10
minutes.
minutes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Let me just that's the point of about multiverse. Yeah.
Yeah.
You are not making the claim. It is the case. You are making the claim. It is one possible explanation. Yeah. But there are issues with bringing multiverse as explanation, and so that being an that refuting the explanation that God, an intelligent creator, did. Because let's say we don't know how many, even in a multiverse, we don't know how many universes there are. One, two, 300,000, however many. Yeah. How do we know those universes are not in an amount where and such a extremely minute probability complex life permitting universe is still requires an intelligent creator? I mean, let's say the number of universes in that multiverse are 100, right? Let's assume that they are 100. That still doesn't explain the level of complexity required for a complex life permitting universe. It will still be an extremely minute probability event. Secondly, let's
Right.
say there
Right.
are
But
1,000
sorry.
universes.
Can
Let's
I
say there are 1,000 universes. How do we know? Let let me finish this point. Let's say there are a
yeah go.
thousand universes, right? How do we know that each of them is not designed for complex life? We can't know anything about those universes. So how can we claim that simple multiverse refutes the fine-tuning argument?
Well, so I'm not saying that it makes it so that it's impossible that there would be a god or that there would be fine tuning. I'm just saying that it makes it so that it's not needed. So the point is that atheism can explain why there's fine tuning. Um, and in terms of the first thing, so if you said if there are 100 universes or just 1,000, then it can't explain it. Well, So even if we grant that, the point is there aren't just 100 or 1,000. On these multiverse theories, to the extent that they're able to explain fine tuning, there would be oodles and oodles. So potential there could be infinite, or there could be just some enormous number. So like on the many worlds interpretation, the number of universes created per second is 2 to the power of 10 to the power of 18. Or no, sorry, but that it's way more than that. That's the number that are created like by. That's an immense underestimate. It's way more than that. But so that's more than enough universes for there to be adequate fine tuning.
That point assumes that things within the universe are same as outside the universe.
It
Again,
does not.
same point applies. But other than that, of course it does. You're taking a frame of reference. You're assuming particular conditions that apply that you are assuming will apply outside the universe, but you can't actually know that. But other than that, I made a second point. Even in a multiverse, you cannot negate an absolute beginning and and there being a cause. But more than that, let's say we can make up theories, we can make up possible explanations for anything, but only way because we know there's a cause, right? On this argument, the Kalam proves at least there's a cause on an theory of time. Yeah, we don't know anything about their cause. The only thing we have to analyze about that cause, whether that cause is an intelligent creator or not, is this universe. And you can see it extremely, it's finely tuned for extremely complex life, and the odds of this happening are extremely minute. So the rational position is to take by looking at what we do have, the evidence that we do have, and that shows that the cause of the universe is an intelligent creator because we don't have other universities to analyze. We don't know what's going on there. It can be possible, but they are the same way. Many things can be possible. What we have of that cause is this universe, and at least that shows that cause is an intelligent creator.
Um, well, so again, I'm not saying that we can rule out God with certainty based on the multiverse. I'm just saying that it's not needed because multiverse can explain it. And no part of this relies on the assumption that things outside the universe work the same way as things inside the universe. The claim is just that there are plausible multiverse models that are able to explain fine tuning. But I have more points that I would like to raise other than the multiverse. So if you want to get the last word on this, then we could either wrap up because you said you had to go pretty soon. But if you have more time, there are more points that I want to raise.
No, I think we should wrap up.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Let's talk again at some point because this has been a fun chat, and I appreciate. I appreciated the contributions. Thanks so much for coming on. It was a lot of fun. Talk to you later. Thanks for watching, everyone. Right.
Bye.